May 2nd, 2025. A quiet morning in rural Nova Scotia turns into a nightmare that will grip a nation. Two children, 6-year-old Lily Sullivan and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, vanish without a trace from their own backyard. Both parents claim they were home when it happened. Both parents say they have no idea what occurred. But as investigators dig deeper, as leaked text messages surface, as timelines shift and stories change, a disturbing picture emerges. This isn't a case of children who wandered off into the woods. This is something far more sinister. Two parents, countless conflicting stories, and a web of lies that's finally starting to unravel. Were the children sleeping or playing in the kitchen when they disappeared? Was the back door open or closed? Were there footprints in the backyard or weren't there? Why did one parent immediately lawyer up while the other started deleting messages? And the question that haunts everyone following this case: where are Lilly and Jack Sullivan right now? Before we examine the evidence that suggests these parents may have fooled investigators, the media, and the public for months, you need to subscribe to True Crime Vault immediately and hit that notification bell. This case is breaking open as we speak, with new information emerging that completely changes what we thought we knew. We're covering details and analyzing evidence that mainstream media has missed or chosen not to report. If you want the complete story as this investigation develops, subscribe right now. Hit that like button because it pushes this critical content to more people demanding answers for Lily and Jack. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the parents are involved? What do you think really happened that morning? Let's discuss this as a community that refuses to let two missing children be forgotten. Lily and Jack Sullivan lived with their mother, Malahia Brooks Murray, their stepfather, Daniel Martell, and their infant sister, Meadow, in an extremely remote home on Gerlach Road in Nova Scotia. This wasn't a suburban neighborhood with close neighbors and security cameras. This was deep rural isolation. The house was located far off the main road, surrounded almost entirely by dense woods. There were no nearby neighbors within shouting distance. There were no security cameras anywhere on the property or nearby. There wasn't even internet connectivity at the home. This isolation becomes critically important when you understand that it meant there were no external witnesses to what happened, no surveillance footage to verify anyone's story, no way to independently confirm what the parents claim occurred. The property itself was unique in its layout, and that layout matters tremendously when understanding what could have happened that morning. The main house where Daniel and Malahia lived with the three children sat deep on the property, accessible by a long driveway that wound back from the main road. Behind the main house, just a few yards away, sat a white recreational vehicle, essentially a mobile home. This RV was occupied by Daniel's mother, Belinda Martell, and his younger brother, Justin Martell. The proximity of these two dwellings is critical. Anyone in the RV would have been able to hear loud voices, see vehicles coming and going, notice unusual activity at the main house. They were close enough that nothing significant should have escaped their notice. The surrounding terrain was dense Nova Scotia wilderness, thick forest with limited visibility once you stepped off any cleared area, fallen timber creating natural obstacles, steep embankments and rocky terrain that would be difficult for small children to navigate, cold temperatures even in May that could lead to hypothermia, muddy conditions from spring snowmelt. This was not gentle woods where children could wander safely. This was dangerous wilderness that posed serious risks even to experienced adult searchers. The idea that two young children, ages 4 and 6, could have navigated this terrain on their own seemed increasingly unlikely the more searchers examined it firsthand. Even more troubling is what investigators discovered about the children themselves when they started examining records. There were essentially no school records for Lily and Jack, no medical histories that authorities could locate, no official documentation that would normally exist for children their ages, no enrollment in local schools, no visits to pediatricians that could be traced, no dental records, no immunization records. It's as if these children existed outside of any public system, invisible to the institutions that typically track and protect kids. This absence of records raises immediate red flags. Why would children have no school enrollment, no doctor visits, no paper trail? Were they being deliberately kept hidden from authorities? Were the parents avoiding systems that might have noticed something wrong? Were there injuries or signs of abuse that the parents didn't want documented by mandatory reporters like teachers or healthcare providers? In modern society, children leave digital and paper trails almost from birth. Hospital records from delivery, social security numbers, well child checkups, daycare or preschool enrollment. The absence of these normal touch points suggests deliberate isolation. It suggests the parents wanted these children to remain invisible to outside eyes. And that invisibility becomes terrifying when those children then disappear, because there's no baseline, no recent photos from school, no medical records establishing their normal health and development. Nothing that independent parties can verify about their well-being in the days and weeks before they vanished. Let's talk about what allegedly happened on May 1st, 2025, the day before the children were reported missing. According to some accounts, Lilly and Jack were still alive that afternoon. There may have been photos or videos taken of them, though these have never been publicly released or verified by authorities. If such documentation exists, why hasn't it been shared? In cases of missing children, families typically flood media with recent photos, desperate to get images of their kids in front of as many eyes as possible. The fact that no recent photos or videos from May 1st have been made public is suspicious. If they exist and show the children healthy and happy, releasing them would help the investigation and garner public sympathy. If they don't exist, that raises the question of whether the children were actually alive and well on May 1st. That evening, no one outside the immediate household saw or heard the children. No neighbors reported seeing them playing outside. No delivery drivers or mail carriers noticed them. No one from the community had any interaction with Lilly and Jack on May 1st. From that point forward, every single piece of information about what happened to these children comes from Daniel Martell and Malaya Brooks Murray. There are no independent witnesses. No one can verify their accounts. We're entirely dependent on the truthfulness of two people who are now the primary focus of suspicion in their disappearance. The evening of May 1st is also important because of what we know about the household dynamics. According to later statements, there was tension in the relationship between Daniel and Malaya. There are suggestions that Malaya may have been planning to leave, to take the children and start over without Daniel. If that's true, May 1st might have been a pressure point, a moment when decisions were being made or ultimatums were being delivered. We don't know what conversations happened in that house that evening. We don't know if there were arguments, confrontations, moments of crisis. But we know that by the next morning, 2 children were gone. The morning of May 2nd, 2025 is where the official story begins, and it's riddled with problems from the start. According to Daniel Martell, he woke up somewhere between 6 and 7 a.m. He claims he saw Jack playing in the kitchen. He says he saw Lily wearing a pink shirt walking into a bedroom after using the bathroom. This detailed description sounds specific and concrete, the kind of memory that should be reliable. He remembers what Lily was wearing. He remembers which room she walked into. He remembers Jack playing, presumably with toys, in the kitchen area. These are precise visual details that suggest he's recalling an actual moment. But then the account becomes vague and problematic. Daniel says he returned from somewhere. The story is unclear about where he went. Did he go to the bathroom himself? Did he go outside to the RV to talk to his mother? Did he go to another room in the house? This vagueness is suspicious because the detail suddenly drops away at the crucial moment. When asked what happened next, when asked about the transition from seeing the children to discovering them missing, the story becomes fuzzy. He returned from wherever he'd been and found both children gone. Just like that. 2 children who had been in the house moments before had vanished. The sliding glass door to the backyard was closed when he found it. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks or shattered glass, no signs that anyone had broken out, no damage to the door or frame that would indicate children frantically trying to escape. And critically, there were no footprints outside the door, no small shoe prints in the dirt or grass, no drag marks that would suggest children or bodies being pulled across the ground. No physical evidence whatsoever that the children had walked or been carried away from the house through that door or any other exit. What makes this even more suspicious is what was missing from the house that morning in terms of evidence of the children being awake and active. The children's beds were reportedly undisturbed, as if they'd never been slept in that night. The covers weren't thrown back the way kids typically leave them when they wake up and climb out of bed. The pillows weren't dented from little heads having rested on them all night. The beds looked almost made, almost unused. This raises the disturbing possibility that the children never made it to bed the night before, that something happened to them on May 1st rather than May 2nd. and the entire story about seeing them alive that morning is fabricated. No breakfast had been prepared for the children. No cereal boxes sitting out on the counter. No bowls in the sink. No juice cups. No evidence that anyone had been feeding two young children that morning. When you have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old in your house, breakfast time is usually chaotic. There's mess. There's noise. There's the process of getting food into small children who may or may not be cooperative. The complete absence of any breakfast-related evidence suggests the children weren't there to be fed. There was no noise or mess typical of two toddlers being awake in a house. Anyone who has spent time around young children knows they're not quiet. They run, they play, they knock things over, they talk loudly, they argue with each other. A house with two small children awake is not silent. Yet no one reported hearing the normal sounds of children that morning. Belinda, in the RV just yards away, should have heard kids playing if they were outside. She should have heard voices if they were awake and active. The silence itself is evidence that something in the official story doesn't add up. It was as if the children hadn't been there at all that morning despite Daniel's claims of seeing them. And this is where we have to start considering the possibility that Daniel's entire account of that morning is a fabrication. A story constructed to establish that the children were alive on May 2nd, when perhaps they had actually died the previous day or night. Here's where the timeline becomes critical and deeply problematic. At approximately 6 a.m. on May 2nd, Malahia Brooks Murray made a 911 call reporting the children missing. This was the first official notification to authorities. She told the emergency dispatcher that her children were gone, that they couldn't be found, that she needed help immediately. The call came in at 6 a.m. But if we believe Daniel's account that he woke up between 6 and 7 a.m. and saw the children playing before discovering them missing sometime after 7, the timeline is completely broken. How did Malahia call 911 at 6 a.m. to report children missing that weren't discovered missing until after 7 a.m.? The math doesn't work. Someone is lying about the timeline. Either Daniel's account of when he woke up and when he discovered them missing is false, or Malahia called 911 before the children were actually discovered missing, which would only make sense if she already knew they were gone because something had happened to them earlier, possibly the night before. Neither scenario makes sense if both parents are telling the truth. One of them, possibly both of them, is lying about the sequence of events that morning. But the timeline problems get even worse when you look at what Daniel himself said in leaked messages. According to his later account, approximately 3 to 4 hours passed between when he allegedly discovered the children were gone and when Malahia made the 911 call. 3 to 4 hours. Let that sink in. If you discovered your 4-year-old and 6-year-old missing from your home, would you wait 3 to 4 hours before calling police? No rational parent would. Every instinct, every ounce of panic would drive you to call for help immediately. That delay is inexplicable unless something else was happening during those hours. Unless the parents needed time for something. Time to stage a scene. Time to coordinate their stories. Time to hide evidence of what really occurred. Time to move something or someone from the property. 3 to 4 hours is an eternity when children are missing. It's long enough to drive significant distances, to bury something, to clean up a scene, to manufacture a narrative. The fact that Daniel admits to this delay in his own messages is damning. He's essentially confessing that there was a massive gap between discovery and notification, a gap that makes no sense in an innocent scenario. From May 2nd through May 7th, 2025, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched one of the largest search operations in Nova Scotia history. When the 911 call came in reporting 2 missing children, authorities responded with everything they had. Hundreds of officers deployed to the area. Some came from local detachments. Others were brought in from across the province. Search and rescue teams, specialist units trained in locating missing persons in wilderness, assembled and began combing every inch of the surrounding forest. These weren't casual volunteers. These were professionals with years of experience, with training in search patterns and evidence collection, with knowledge of how to find people in difficult terrain. Thermal imaging drones flew grid patterns over the forest. These drones can detect heat signatures from bodies even under tree cover, even in dense vegetation. They flew systematic searches designed to ensure no area was missed. Aircraft, helicopters, and small planes scanned from above with observers looking for any sign of the children or disturbance in the landscape that might indicate where they'd gone. Boats searched waterways. Every stream, every pond, every body of water in the area was examined because drowning is a common cause of death in cases of missing small children. Search dogs, highly trained canines with the ability to track human scent over long distances and through difficult conditions, worked the terrain methodically. These dogs are incredibly effective. They can follow a scent trail hours or even days old. They can detect human remains. They're one of the most reliable tools in finding missing people. Multiple dogs from different teams were brought in to ensure thorough coverage. It was an absolutely massive effort involving tremendous resources and manpower. The community rallied. Volunteers showed up by the dozens wanting to help search. The story made national news. Everyone was praying these children would be found safe. And they found essentially nothing. After days of intensive searching by professionals and volunteers, after thousands of person-hours combing the woods, after technology and dogs and aircraft all deployed, they found virtually no evidence of where Lilly and Jack had gone. No footprints leading away from the house into the woods. No small shoe impressions in the mud that would show which direction they'd walked. No discarded clothing. Children walking through rough terrain often lose shoes or jackets, leaving a trail. There was nothing like that. No personal belongings dropped by children. No toys, no comfort items, nothing that would indicate kids had passed through these woods. The absence of evidence was itself deeply troubling. When children wander off, they leave traces. They break branches as they push through undergrowth. They leave scent trails that dogs can follow. They drop things. They leave footprints. The fact that none of these normal signs existed suggested very strongly that the children had not walked off into these woods on their own. It suggested that whatever happened to them, it didn't involve them wandering away from home as the parents claimed. Some items were discovered in the woods during the searches. A fragment of pink blanket was found along a pipeline trail about 1 kilometer from the house. This pipeline trail is essentially a cleared corridor through the forest where infrastructure was installed, creating a relatively open path that would be easier for children to walk along than dense bush. The blanket fragment was initially uncertain in terms of identification. Investigators had to compare it with items from the Sullivan home to determine if it belonged to Lilly. Once that comparison was made, it was confirmed as matching a blanket that had been Lilly's. This became a crucial piece of evidence showing the children, or at least something belonging to them, had been at least that far from home. Some children's clothing was also found in the wooded areas during searches. The specific items and their condition haven't been publicly detailed, but their discovery raised questions about what had happened. A water bottle was located as well, the kind a child might carry. When investigators showed these items to Daniel Martel, asking him to identify whether they belonged to Lilly and Jack, he denied they were theirs. He said those weren't the children's things. He was certain, or at least he claimed to be certain, that the blanket, the clothing, the water bottle found in the woods didn't belong to his missing stepchildren. But if they weren't the missing children's belongings, whose were they? Why were children's items in the woods near the house at all? Why would there be a pink blanket fragment, children's clothing, and a child-sized water bottle in the forest surrounding a property where 2 children had just vanished if those items didn't belong to those children? Daniel's denial of these items raised more questions than it answered. Was he genuinely certain they weren't Lilly and Jack's things? Or was he distancing himself from evidence for some other reason? Was he concerned that admitting these were their belongings would create additional questions about how they ended up scattered in the woods? His refusal to identify them as belonging to the children felt like another piece of suspicious behavior in a case full of suspicious behavior. After 5 days of intensive searching that yielded virtually no results, on May 7th, RCMP made the difficult decision to scale back the physical search operations. They hadn't found the children. They hadn't found remains. They hadn't found any clear trail or evidence of where the children might have gone. The searchers had covered enormous ground, looked in every conceivable hiding spot, checked and rechecked areas where children might have fallen or gotten stuck. There was simply nothing more to be found through physical searching. The investigation pivoted from active searching to data analysis and digital forensics. This shift is significant because it indicates investigators were no longer confident this was a simple case of children wandering off into the wilderness. They were looking at this through a different lens now, examining digital evidence, analyzing communications between the parents, building a case based on what the parents said and did, rather than searching wilderness for lost children. This transition from search and rescue to criminal investigation is a critical moment in any missing person case. It represents the point where authorities acknowledge that the initial story they were told probably isn't the truth. When they shift resources from finding lost children to examining the people who reported them lost, it means suspicion has crystallized into focus. The parents, the household, the timeline, the story. These became the investigation rather than the woods surrounding the property. One of the most sophisticated elements of the investigation involved technology that most people don't know police have access to. From May 8th through May 15th, RCMP partnered with Maxar Technologies and Planet Labs, commercial companies that operate constellations of high-resolution satellite imaging systems. These satellites orbit the Earth constantly, taking images of the surface below. The resolution is remarkable, showing details down to less than a meter. In some cases, these satellites can show objects as small as 30 centimeters across. They'd been taking images of the Sullivan property and surrounding area regularly as part of their normal operations, which meant investigators could access historical imagery from before the children disappeared and compare it to images from after. Artificial intelligence algorithms were deployed to analyze these satellite images. AI can detect changes in landscape that human eyes might miss. It can identify disturbances in soil, changes in vegetation patterns, new objects appearing in areas, or objects that were present and then vanished. The algorithms were programmed to look for any anomalies on the Sullivan property and the surrounding areas, anything that might indicate where something or someone had been buried, moved, or hidden. And they found something that immediately became a major focus of the investigation. AI analysis flagged a rectangular patch of disturbed earth on the property. The dimensions were approximately 2 meters long by roughly 1 meter wide. 2 meters is about 6.5 feet, the size of a grave, the size of a space where 2 small bodies could be placed. This disturbance appeared in satellite imagery taken after May 1st. When investigators compared it to earlier images from April, this disturbed patch wasn't there. The Earth had been undisturbed in the earlier images, but in the images from early May, after the children disappeared, this rectangular patch of disturbed soil was clearly visible. Then, in images taken just a few days later, it had vanished. Not that whatever was buried had been removed, but the surface appearance had changed. The earth had been covered, smoothed over, possibly with grass or leaves placed on top to disguise the disturbance. Someone had taken the time to conceal this area, to make it blend in with the surrounding ground so it wouldn't be immediately visible to searchers on foot. This location was off any established trail, away from the main house, not in an area where normal foot traffic would explain a patch of disturbed earth. It wasn't near a garden where digging would be expected. It wasn't along a path where maintenance work might occur. It was in a seemingly random spot in the woods, and that randomness itself was significant because it suggested someone had chosen this location specifically because it was away from where people normally went. To this day, RCMP has never publicly confirmed whether they excavated this site. They haven't stated what, if anything, was found there. There's been no official announcement about digging up this location, no press conference revealing what was underneath that disturbed earth. That silence is itself significant. There are really only 2 possibilities. Either they excavated and found nothing, in which case the disturbance was from something else and isn't relevant to the case, or they excavated and found something they're not ready to disclose publicly because it's evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation that hasn't yet resulted in charges. The fact that they've said nothing suggests the latter. If they dug up this location and found it was just a spot where someone had buried trash or done some landscaping or something innocent, they'd likely have said so to quell speculation. The continued silence suggests they found something they're keeping confidential as the investigation continues. The artificial intelligence analysis also identified other suspicious elements beyond the disturbed earth. A gray SUV was flagged for passing the property 4 times during early morning hours in the 2 weeks surrounding the disappearance. 4 separate passes by the same vehicle in the early morning, during hours when traffic in this remote area should be virtually non-existent. The timestamps on the satellite images showed this vehicle passing at times like 4:30 a.m., 5:15 a.m., hours when almost no one has legitimate reason to be driving past a remote rural property. Who was in that vehicle? Why were they repeatedly passing the Sullivan property? Was this someone conducting surveillance? Watching the house, waiting for an opportunity? Was it someone checking on something they'd done or planning to do? Investigators have never publicly identified this vehicle or explained these passes. They know about it. The satellite imagery is clear. But they haven't told the public whose vehicle it was or whether the owner has been questioned. That suggests either the owner is cooperating and has been cleared, or the owner is a suspect and they don't want to tip their hand by revealing that they know about the vehicle's presence. Another anomaly detected by the AI was a woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat seen at two distant locations on different days at the exact same time. This is physically impossible unless there were two different women, or unless the image timestamps were somehow incorrect, or unless something very strange was happening with the surveillance or the individual being captured. The AI flagged this because it's an anomaly that suggests either a technical error or deliberate deception, possibly someone trying to create an alibi by appearing to be in one place while actually being in another. Investigators would need to follow up to determine what this anomaly represents, but the fact that it was flagged at all shows the sophistication of the analysis being conducted. A small car was also spotted in satellite imagery near an abandoned shopping center just 800 meters, about half a mile, from the Sullivan home on May 2nd. This vehicle didn't match any cars registered to people in the immediate area. The make and model could be determined from the satellite images, but when cross-referenced with vehicle registrations for residents in the area, there was no match. This car shouldn't have been there. It remains unidentified. Was someone waiting there in that vehicle? Was this a meeting point where the children were transferred to another vehicle? Was someone using this abandoned location to stage something without being noticed by residents? The unanswered questions pile higher with each detail that emerges. From mid-May through June 2025, the behavior of the two parents diverged dramatically in ways that raised enormous suspicion from both investigators and the public following the case. Daniel Martel remained in the house alone and continued giving interviews to media. Staying at the scene is somewhat normal for a parent whose children are missing. You want to be there when they're found, when they come home. But the interviews Daniel gave became increasingly problematic in their content and tone. In one widely criticized interview that circulated online and was analyzed extensively, he made a statement that shocked people following the case. He said, referring to Lilly and Jack, "I'm not their father, so I don't really have any rights." For a man who had been living with and helping to raise these children for years, who had been present when they disappeared, who had been the male parental figure in their lives, to suddenly distance himself by emphasizing he wasn't their biological father, struck many observers as calculated and cold. Why would someone who loved these children as his own, someone who had taken on a fatherly role, suddenly emphasize that legal distinction at this moment? It sounded like someone creating distance, preparing to claim he had no responsibility for what happened to them. It sounded like someone establishing that these weren't really his kids, so their disappearance shouldn't reflect on him the way it would on a biological parent. The phrasing, "I don't really have any rights," seemed less about lamenting his lack of legal standing and more about disclaiming responsibility. In the context of everything else that was emerging, this statement felt like another piece of suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, Malahia Brooks Murray's behavior was equally, if not more, suspicious in how dramatically different it was from what you'd expect from a mother of missing children. She left the home shortly after the incident. Within just days of Lilly and Jack being reported missing, Malahia packed up and left the property. She took her infant daughter, Meadow, with her. She moved back in with her family, reportedly going to stay with her mother, Cindy, and other relatives in another part of Nova Scotia. And she cut off all contact with Daniel completely, totally, immediately. She stopped answering his calls, letting them go to voicemail. She blocked him on social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere they'd been connected. She refused any communication through text or email. This severing of contact was absolute. Child Protective Services then became involved and barred Daniel from seeing Meadow, citing his lack of legal custody. Since Daniel wasn't Meadow's father legally, actually he was Meadow's biological father, but the children Lilly and Jack weren't his biological children. Let me correct that. Daniel was Meadow's biological father, so he would have parental rights to her. But CPS apparently had concerns about his role in the older children's disappearance, sufficient to restrict his access even to his biological daughter. This intervention by Child Protection suggests authorities had serious suspicions about Daniel's involvement in whatever happened to Lilly and Jack. Malehia's family reportedly refused to communicate with Daniel at all. They wouldn't take his calls, wouldn't pass messages, created a complete wall between him and Malehia. This complete severing of ties happened with remarkable speed. For a couple who had been living together, raising children together, sharing a home and a life, to suddenly have zero contact within days of those children disappearing is extremely suspicious. What happened that made Malehia flee and cut Daniel out completely? What did she know or fear that necessitated this dramatic break? There are several possible explanations. One is that Malehia feared Daniel, believed he was responsible for harming the children, and fled for her own safety and the safety of her infant. Another is that Malehia was responsible or complicit and was advised by family or legal counsel to cut all contact with Daniel to prevent any coordinated story or any conversations that could later be used against her. A third possibility is that both parents knew what happened, and cutting contact was part of a strategy to ensure they couldn't contradict each other if questioned separately by police. Whatever the reason, the speed and totality of the separation suggests it wasn't an organic relationship ending. This was purposeful distancing, executed quickly and completely. At the same time, investigators were tracking the parents' behavior. A massive digital evidence collection effort was underway. Over 180 pieces of community-sourced footage were collected and reviewed. This included dashcam recordings from vehicles that might have passed through the area on May 1st or 2nd. Many vehicles now have cameras that record continuously while driving, capturing everything in front of the vehicle. Investigators put out public requests for anyone who had driven near the Sullivan property to submit their dashcam footage. Subscribe to True Crime Vault now. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell for more in-depth investigations. Drop your thoughts in the comments about what you think happened. Thank you for watching as we continue seeking justice for Lilly and Jack Sullivan.